This video is sponsored by Squarespace.
All the years that I have been doing stunts and making movies, it took all of that knowledge to be able to accomplish not just what I did, I think what we all did with the Burj.
After Mission Impossible 3, the franchise was on the ropes. The film's critical reception was good, and it was certainly a commercial success. But despite an increased budget, the film had left diminishing returns, making over $100 million less than the previous film. A lot of the blame for this came down on Tom Cruise, who had been embarrassing himself with awkward moments like the couch jumping incident and combative interviews, often centered around his advocacy for Scientology and its ideology.
I think that there's a higher and better quality of life. And I think that promoting, for me personally, see, you're saying what I can't.
He had also bizarrely fired his long-term publicist and hired his sister to replace her, although he had managed to delay the fallout over this by agreeing to take a hefty pay cut on Mission Impossible 3. Eventually, his image problem came to the forefront again. The damage mounted until Cruise's boss's boss, Sumner Redstone, head of Paramount's owner Viacom, publicly stated, "We don't think that someone who effectuates creative suicide and costs the company revenue should be on the lot." His recent conduct has not been acceptable to Paramount. He had made himself a pariah.
Tom is no longer the boy wonder we once fell in love with, and Tom has been working overtime to keep a lower profile. These days, he even sneaks into the theater to watch his wife, Katie Holmes, perform on Broadway in All My Sons.
Just 3 months after Mission Impossible 3 came out, in August 2006, Paramount declined to renew their contract with Cruise and his production company, CW. CW managed to survive through a deal with MGM and made several more films, with Cruise and his production partner, Paula Wagner, leading United Artists under their wing. But CW ultimately folded when Wagner left in 2008.
The truth is that for a while, it seemed like it was Tom Cruise against the world.
However, Cruise managed to get a second win that year, which saw the release of Tropic Thunder. Despite the film being controversial, Cruise's character was very popular, being credited for revitalizing his career.
What do you need, Peck?
I've interviewed our next guest about half a dozen times, and he always has something fascinating to say. However, this year, Tom Cruise is doing something different. He's letting his work speak for him. The last time I saw Tom Cruise was 3 years ago on the set of Mission Impossible 3.
You know, there's things that I could have handled better.
And so Cruise was rehabilitated, paving the way for another Mission Impossible movie. Cruise found an ally in J.J. Abrams, who had earned credibility inside Paramount by rebooting Star Trek, having directed Mission Impossible 3. And he was a reliable partner for the project and joined on with Cruise to co-produce the movie. As with Mission Impossible 3, Abrams sourced writers from the TV show. In this case, the recruits were Josh Applebaum and Andre Nemec, who also had been co-producers for the show. They were hired in August 2009 and penned the script alongside Abrams himself. With writing and production sorted out, they now needed a director. Edgar Wright was in the running but ruled himself out because he was too busy, since he was doing press for his Scott Pilgrim film at the time. And so then another director by the name of Brad Bird came into the wings. Bird had been working on a separate movie but kept running into story issues and was looking to direct something that already had a decent foundation in terms of script and development. He had already been in touch with Tom Cruise after he praised his work on The Incredibles, and Cruise had mentioned that he'd been interested in working together if he ever wanted to move into live action. So yes, this would be the first live action film for the director, who is most known for his directing of animated films like Ratatouille, The Iron Giant, and yes, of course, like we mentioned, The Incredibles. His animation days brought him knowledge on how to frame scenes and visualize them with sketches, setting up the look of those all-important stunts that, let's be honest, define Mission Impossible much more than the plot. When Bird signed on, the script was in a rough state. As is typical with Mission Impossible films, it was heavy on the stunts and light on the plot that was supposed to thread them together, to the point that it had already been restarted 6 times beforehand, completely revised each time. And so Bird, Abrams, and their writing duo worked on carving it into something much more coherent, experimenting with showing Ethan trying to lead a team and keep them together instead of doing everything on his own, bringing Peg's character Benji out into the field instead of him being confined to a desk, and making the team's gadgets less reliable than before, forcing the characters to improvise.
Incoming transmission from Mission Control.
Operative 207, we have a new assignment for you. We have noticed an uptick in traffic online of people searching for you, including those you are interacting with in your undercover mission as Oil Baron Salvo Kowalski. We need you to create a website that looks professionally done to counter this threat. Using our sponsor Squarespace, proceed to the closest computer terminal. Squarespace offers a quick way for any agent to make a professional-looking website on the fly. Our agents don't have much time while on the run and need a quick solution without all of the coding that comes with website design. Squarespace offers great tools from cutting-edge design with Blueprint AI, helping to enhance your website, SEO tools to help get your cover story seen, and an appointment section in case you need to bring anyone in for a little chat to find out more information. Try and make your own today by heading over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/framevoyager for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Good job, Operative 207. Now on to the next step in the mission.
Filming would begin on October 2010, with locations for filming scattered throughout the world from Budapest, Mumbai, Prague, Moscow, Vancouver, Bangalore, Chennai, and Dubai. Easily one of the more ambitious shoot schedules of the entire series. But while it seemed as if everything was well planned out for this film, they would end up running into problems with the script again. Even after the work Abrams, Brad Bird, and the screenwriting duo of Applebaum and Nemec had done to polish the script, it still wasn't enough. And in the middle of this production, a new writer, McQuarrie, was brought in to handle the rewrites. This was a complicated task, as he couldn't just freely choose what parts he wanted to tweak. I had to communicate with the entire staff to determine what I could and couldn't change, what sets had been built or struck, what scenes that I could or couldn't reshoot. I learned so much about production being right there, and so much of what was changed was background material. As is usually the case with Mission Impossible, the stunts are the centerpiece, and the narrative surrounding them is more open to tweaking and being made up on the fly.
The plan was for us to stop them together.
Well, what are you gonna do?
Change the plan.
McQuarrie explained that the characters and plot devices of the film were poorly explained, or just not at all. And one of the key changes he made was with Julia. In the original script, Julia was killed off, which he argued would ruin the ending by making it too downtrodden. So he turned her death into a ruse that was revealed later to have been faked. Another change included simplifying the dialogue, replacing the backstory of Brandt, and introducing more scenes involving the rest of the IMF team. And these changes were all handled in just 3 weeks. The speed and efficiency that he showed when he was able to revise the script so quickly, and his newfound production knowledge from the experience of writing mid-shoot, didn't go unnoticed, and he came to be seen as a prime candidate for a higher-up job with the sequels, and we'll talk about more with McQuarrie later on in the series. Now, the director would bring on cinematographer Robert Elswit, someone who had a lot of experience with big blockbuster films, but had also won awards for Best Cinematography for the film There Will Be Blood in 2007, and, would also go on to film the movie Nightcrawler. For the film, director Bird wanted to move away from the film's complex sequences that were always pulled off to perfection by the antagonists, and instead wanted everything to sort of fall apart and force them into improvising along the way. And that improvisational nature, the director wanted you to feel visually, with Elswit saying there was a little more of a chaotic style to this one. Brad was less interested in a formal approach to the design of the movie. And that chaotic style also tasked the team with filming roughly 27 minutes of the movie on IMAX film cameras. Yes, somehow the team managed to shoot some of the more inconvenient sequences on one of the hardest to use cinema formats in the world. This was only the 4th film ever to use IMAX film cameras for a feature film, with The Dark Knight being the first in 2008, Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen was second in 2009, and Tree of Life in 2011 was third. But the Tree of Life film was never screened in IMAX theaters. So they really were testing out a system for this film that had not been widely used, and really not used in the way they were trying to do it for this film. But Christopher Nolan, according to Elwood, had proven that you can do absolutely anything with an IMAX camera.
So immediately when Tom said, let's produce this, we started talking about locations. And coincidentally, he brought up the idea of shooting in Dubai, which was a place he had been fascinated by, particularly the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world.
I'm fortunate that I get to do exactly what my dream was, is to make movies. And I get the opportunity to climb the tallest building in the world.
And what better scene to use the IMAX cameras on than for this one? Funny enough, some challenges were ahead for the crew though, mainly ones that had to do with trust from the Dubaians they ended up working with, as shooting for Mission Impossible 4 ended up being a complicated affair and even required some modifications to the Burj Khalifa itself. For shooting, conveniently enough, many floors of the impressively tall building were empty, which meant that the crew could easily set up shop in those floors and start setting up their equipment. It took a good while to be good to go though, as filming on those floors required even more modifications to the structure of the Burj Khalifa than was originally thought.
We would have to drill into the ground, we'd have to drill into the ceilings, and we had to get permission for every hole that we drilled. And we had to start taking windows out. And these are windows that had never been taken out or aren't meant to come out.
With every drilled hole carefully logged and given permission to, big camera cranes and fixtures could be secured. But for other modifications, the crew had to negotiate in order to get permission to do them. In this case, it was smashing out the windows so that both Tom Cruise and the camera could poke out of the building.
At first, there was a big resistance about taking them out. And we said, look, if windows can go in, they can come out. If we can't do that, then we can't do the sequence. So there were conversations that took place about that, and everyone found a way to do it.
Oh, that's high.
After multiple discussions, the crew were able to smash out quite a handful of windows, up to 26 at different strategically chosen locations. This really opened up more opportunities for the stunt team to conduct their work. But now we have 26 gaping holes in the exterior of the tallest skyscraper in the world. Safety needed to come back to the forefront, which resulted in power drilling more holes into the ceiling and securing safety hooks in the areas near and around the open windows.
Safety became a huge issue. So we had to create these red boxes that were taped out, and anybody who stepped inside of that tape had to have a harness and had to be tied off.
Now, Tom could more safely perform his acts of gymnastry, which, while beautiful to observe, was nerve-wracking for the director, with him recounting that he couldn't sleep one night as he was flooded with anxiety about the fact that the lead star and executive producer for this movie were dangling from a single puny wire.
It was like 4 a.m, suddenly my eyes just snapped open and I realized the star of our movie is like swinging around on the outside of the tallest building in the world, held on by like a tiny wire.
In the end though, Tom had been doing death-defying stunts for years at that point, and it turns out that to a stuntman, there is not much of a difference between working at 50 feet of height and 500 feet of height. For all those situations, if the safety equipment fails or someone gets a little too reckless, the only destination for them left is the pavement. And when that destination is met, there's really no one that can help you. The good thing was that Cruise also trained for the shoot in a studio before ever climbing the Burj Khalifa for the first time. The team built a mimic of the exterior windows of the building, which were blasted with heat lamps to stimulate the scorching exterior after being loaded by a day's worth of sunshine. There he could first rehearse the movements and get used to the heat before anything was shot for real.
And it was also physically getting training in the harness, and I would do speed climbs where for 30 minutes I would just climb up and down, so that I was ready when the camera was ready and that no one would be waiting for me.
Climbing the towering building alone, however, wasn't enough. While Tom Cruise really climbs up the tallest skyscraper in the world, he of course couldn't do it without a safety rig. And getting rid of that rig was a major pain in the butt, requiring 4 compositors to work many hours on removing the rigs for around 3 months straight. The artists at Fuel VFX were faced with a gargantuan challenge. Rig removal can generally be pretty straightforward for many scenes. You paint out the wires and then track the changes forward and backwards until something is out of whack again. But for Ghost Protocol's Burj Khalifa's sequence, the process of painting out those wires was a different beast altogether. The problem was that the Burj Khalifa's exterior was essentially just one massive mirror. Reflections would warp around and make it more difficult to track the painted out wires, and to make matters even worse, more than just one reflection was present in quite a few scenes, needing to remove up to 4 wire reflections, which all couldn't be reliably tracked. Aside from things like adding fake glass shards when breaking a window to rotoscoping Tom Cruise and the plates to drive the effects, no work was done in doing any face replacements, as you can expect at this point. Tom did all the bone-chilling stunts himself. Luckily, there was also a clear view of the urban abyss below, so we could really take in the dazzling heights. But interestingly enough, that was not always planned. Early on, Brad Bird intended for the Burj Khalifa to pierce through the clouds in an attempt to convey just how tall the building really is. Jeffrey Chernoff suggested that instead of clouds, the team could instead depict a sandstorm, wherein the idea for the sandstorm chase came about. While looking cool and making for an interesting chase, local meteorologists noticed something strange about those storms in the movie. Gulf News reported that those sandstorms are actually very unlikely to happen in Dubai, as those storms normally start in Kuwait and Iraq, and when they move to the UAE, they're dispersed so much that at most we have some dusty winds. Nothing near the magnitude as we saw in Ghost Protocol. Great for the movie, but sadly not very true to life. But of course that didn't mean that they wouldn't try to kick up a sandstorm of their own making, with a bunch of fans and a lot of dirt and sand kicked up into the air, making it look like Tom Cruise was driving through a crazy sandstorm. But as with a lot of practical effects, this sandstorm will be greatly augmented by the VFX team to round out any missing patches and give it a bit of color. And according to VFX supervisor John Knoll, Ghost Protocol would end up with about 700 VFX shots in total. Now, to make sure that everything they shot during the shoot with the IMAX camera actually worked, looked good, and did what they were trying to accomplish, they had a pretty insane process to even see the footage, taking over 4 days to process. The closest place to process the footage was in Los Angeles, so they would wrap the IMAX 65mm film, ship it off on Tuesday, have it processed on Wednesday, and finally ready to view on Thursday. Pretty lengthy process to just make sure you didn't mess up a shot. Now, interestingly, they would all watch the dailies in an IMAX theater that supported its massive 1.43:1 ratio, which I do have to say, it's honestly a pretty awesome way to get to view your dailies. Now, it's kind of hard to top the Burj Khalifa as far as a practical set goes. But probably the craziest practical set that they would build for this movie was for the final fight scene. This insane 65-foot tall automated parking structure was built in an enormous hangar. And yes, just like in the movie, it all can move around for real.
It was a very complex automated parking structure with hydraulic paddles, all computerized.
The special effects, we work with construction. They built the outside of it and we built the moving parts. The paddles can hold 7,500 pounds each. Either paddle can move at the same time 180 degrees.
As with a lot of set designs, the VFX team would add a lot of additions in post-production. But despite that, it was a pretty impressive set design. It really made for a very original and eye-pleasing fight scene, and it really did accomplish something different than any other Mission Impossible film up to this point. Now, 65 feet tall isn't really that much compared to the 2,722 foot tall Burj Khalifa. But for one actor, any height at all was too much.
How do you deal with an actor who is very, very afraid of heights?
You lure him in with sweets first, and then you harness him up and start swinging him around. And don't let him out of the harness until you get your shot.
Load the paddle up to level 1. And we can show Michael what he's doing.
My whole mission was not to puke.
Thankfully, the actor was able to overcome his fear of heights and finish out the segment. And to finish it all out, they even built a bit of a roller coaster for when the car falls off the edge with Ethan Hunt inside.
So this is pretty cool because we have one giant sound stage and we have the car drop going on up here where Ethan's car drops down a roller coaster.
All in all, this set design was incredibly impressive and an engineering marvel at that. Even if you're not a big Mission Impossible fan, you have to give them some credit for going all out on these stunts, especially in this film. Production would wrap up on March 2011 and head into post-production, where the VFX team certainly had a lot to do before the release. Production would wrap on March 19th, 2011. Later on that year, they would premiere the film at the 8th Dubai Film Festival on December 7th, 2011. Bird would also convince the studio to release the movie to IMAX theaters almost a week before the official release date on December 21st. In the end, they would rack up the second largest box office total for a Mission Impossible series, with a worldwide box office total of $694 million, completely flipping the fortunes of the franchise after the third film and blowing open the doors of opportunity for another installment to the franchise. And you can check out the story of that next installment, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, right here.